Good morning, guys. In the previous classes, we discussed about what is distributed application, what is distributed application, what is interoperability, what is distributed application, what is interoperability, what is HTTP protocol, HTTP methods, HTTP status codes, HTTP request structure, HTTP request structure, HTTP response structure, HTTP request structure, HTTP response structure, working with XML and JAX-B, working with JSON and Jackson, working with XML and JAX-B, working with JSON and Jackson. So these topics we covered in our previous classes. Distributed application. If one application is communicating with another application, then we will call that as distributed application. If one project is communicating with another project, then we will call it as distributed application. Okay, then what is interoperability? Language independent, platform independent applications are called as interoperability. What is this HTTP? HTTP is a protocol. HTTP is a protocol. We are using HTTP protocol as a mediator between client and server. Between the consumer and provider, we are using HTTP as a mediator. Okay, then HTTP methods. So there are several methods available in the HTTP protocol: get method, post method, put method, and delete method. Those are the HTTP methods we have. Those methods we are using to send the request to the server. Status codes: 1xx, 2xx, 3xx, 4xx, 5xx, like that. There are some status codes available. Right? Those status codes will represent what happened with our application. Status codes will represent what happened with our application. Okay, what happened with our application? Got my point? What happened with our application? Now, HTTP request structure. So when we send a request, how that request will go to the server, what informations will go to the server, those details we discussed, right? HTTP request structure. Response structure, what all the informations will be included in the response structure also we discussed. XML is a markup language which is used to represent the data. XML is interoperable. So using XML, we can transfer the data from one application to another application. To convert Java object to XML, XML to Java object, we are using JAX-B API, right? But XML is a heavyweight. It will occupy more memory. So that is the reason nowadays people are not using this XML. People are going for JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It is lightweight format to represent the data. JSON will represent the data in the form of key and value. Okay, So JSON is a format which is interoperable to work, to represent the data and to exchange the data. But in the Java, there is no support directly to deal with JSON data. That's why we are using third-party API called Jackson. Using Jackson API, we can convert Java object into JSON and JSON data into Java object. Okay, so using JAXB API, we will be performing marshalling and unmarshalling. Using JAXB API, we will perform marshalling and unmarshalling. Using Jackson API, we will perform. Using JAXB API, we will perform marshalling and unmarshalling. For that, binding classes are required. Okay, now when we go for Jackson API, we will perform serialization and deserialization. Got my point? So these topics we covered so far in our classes. Next one. So here we are going to develop REST API. We completed our prerequisites to develop REST API. How to develop REST API? How to develop REST API? How to develop REST API? To develop REST APIs, to develop REST APIs, to develop REST API using Java, Sun Microsystem released one API called JAX RS API. So what is the API which is available to develop RESTful services in the Java? To develop REST API, Sun Microsystem to develop RESTful services, or we can say REST API, anything is fine, guys. To develop RESTful services or REST APIs using Java, Sun Microsystem released JAX RS API. JAX RS API having two implementations. JAX RS API having two implementations. What are those two implementations? One is Jersey implementation, and the second one is REST Easy implementation. One is Jersey and the second one is REST Easy. This Jersey implementation provided by Sun Microsystem only. Sun Microsystems only provided implementation for JAX RS API. REST Easy implementation provided by JBoss. Okay, guys. Now, so every language is supported for developing RESTful services because REST APIs are very good to develop distributed applications, right? So when every programming language having a support to develop RESTful services, Sun Microsystem also provided the support to develop RESTful services. So Sun Microsystem released one API called JAX RS API. This JAX RS API is a specification. JAX RS API contains a set of rules and regulations to develop the API. API contains a set of interfaces, right? Right. Now, this API having two implementations. One is a Jersey implementation, another one is REST Easy implementation. So we can develop RESTful services by using any one of the above implementation. We can develop RESTful services or REST APIs. We can develop RESTful services using any one of the above API implementation. By using any one of the implementation available for JAX RS. So that is the details which are given by Sun Microsystem only. Sun Microsystem only developed JAX RS API. For that JAX RS API, they provided implementations. One implementation provided by Sun Microsystem, that implementation is called as Jersey. And the second one, JBoss provided one implementation for JAX RS API. That implementation is called as REST Easy implementation. We can develop RESTful services using any one of the above implementation. Okay, but nowadays Spring Framework also provided support. Spring Framework also provided support to develop RESTful services using Spring WebMVC module. Using Spring WebMVC module. So here you can develop the RESTful services by using JAX RS API, or you can develop the RESTful services by using WebMVC module. So as people are using Spring Framework to develop the applications, then why to use JAX RS separately to develop RESTful services? Let's go with the Spring only, because Spring became Spring became most popular framework in the Java community. All the applications we are developing by using Spring Framework with the help of Spring Boot. Okay, so can we develop RESTful services by using Spring Framework? Can we develop RESTful services by using Spring Framework? Yes, we can develop. Yes, we can develop RESTful services by using Spring Framework. Are you clear? Are you guys clear? We can develop RESTful services using Spring Framework. So in the Spring, there is a WebMVC module to develop. In the Spring, there is a WebMVC module to develop RESTful services. Clear, guys? Now, which one is the recommended approach to develop? Which one is the recommended approach to develop RESTful services now? Using JAX RS API, or using JAX RS API, or using Spring Web MVC? Using Spring Web MVC. So we already discussed Web MVC architecture. There is a dispatcher servlet, handler mapper, controller, all those details we have discussed. Okay, next. RESTful services, REST API architecture. REST API architecture. So we are developing RESTful services by using Spring Web MVC module. So what is the architecture of the REST API? In REST APIs, in RESTful services architecture or REST API architecture. RESTful services architecture. RESTful services architecture, right? So in the RESTful services, we will have two actors. We will have two actors in RESTful services. One is called as provider, or we can say it as a server. Second one is called as consumer, or we will call it as a client, or we can say provider or resource. Provider or resource. Second one is a client, right? Provider or resource, consumer or client. So the application which is providing the resources, or which are providing the services to other applications. So the applications which are providing the services to other applications is called as provider application. The application which is providing services to other applications is called as provider or resource application. The application which is providing services to other applications is called as provider application or resource application. The application which is accessing services from other applications is called as consumer or client application. Okay, the application which is providing services to other applications is called as provider or resource application. The application which is accessing services from other applications is called as consumer or client application. Are you guys clear with my point? Are you guys clear with my point? Are you guys clear with my point? Good. There will be two actors. There will be two actors. One is resource, another one is client. Resource means which will provide the services to other applications. Client means which is going to access services from other applications. So JAX-RS is the old approach to develop REST APIs. JAX-RS is the old approach to develop REST APIs. The JAX-RS API given by Sun Microsystem. For that API, there are two implementations. But currently in the market, how we are developing RESTful services using Java, using Spring Web MVC module, we are developing RESTful services. Developing the RESTful services by using JAX-RS is the legacy approach. What is the latest approach to develop RESTful services? By using Spring Web MVC with the help of Spring Boot. Okay, guys. Now, provider application, client application and resource application, client application and resource application will exchange data in interoperable format. In interoperable format like XML and JSON. Like XML and JSON. Client application and resource applications will exchange data in interoperable format like XML format and JSON format. We will have two actors. They are going to exchange the data in the XML format and in the JSON format. Client application will be sending a request to resource application. Resource application will be sending response to client application. This request can be in the XML format or in the JSON format. This response can be available in the request XML format or in the JSON format. So client and resource are going to communicate. Client and resource are going to communicate with each other by using HTTP protocol as a mediator. So they are going to exchange the data in the interoperable format. Client application may send a request with XML data. Then resource application will receive the data and will process the request. Then resource application will send the response to the client application in the request format or in the response format. So are you clear with this architecture, guys? Fine. Now here RESTful services applications will send the direct response. These RESTful services are used to develop B2B communications. So do we have any presentation logic in the RESTful services? Do we need any view resolver? Do we need any presentation logic for the RESTful services? Do we need any view resolver here? No view resolver, nothing. RESTful services, REST APIs are used to develop B2B communications. RESTful services are used to develop B2B communications. B2B communications, no presentation logic. No presentation logic, no view resolver. No presentation logic and no view resolver, because these applications are used to develop direct B2B communications. One application will send a request to another application. That application will send the response directly. There is no concept of a presentation logic. There is no concept of a view resolver. Are you guys clear? Just read these points. How to develop REST API using Java. How to develop REST APIs using Java. Come on. How to develop REST APIs using Java. Come on, guys. Clear? JAX RS is the old approach to develop REST APIs. So currently we are developing REST APIs by using Spring Web MVC. So in the RESTful services are RESTful web services. Some people will call it as RESTful services. Some people will call it as RESTful web services. Some people will call it as REST API. Everything is same. Two actors will be available: provider and resource. Provider or resource, consumer or client. The application which is providing services to other applications is called as a provider. The application which is accessing services from other applications is called as a consumer. Client application and resource application will exchange the data in the interoperable format. RESTful services are used to develop B2B communications, no presentation logic, no view resolver. Got it. Fine. Develop first REST API using Spring Boot. Develop first REST API using Spring Boot. So Spring Boot we can use to develop Spring based applications. So WebMVC module is providing the support to develop RESTful services. So instead of using only Spring framework, we can go with the Spring Boot. Spring Boot is an approach to develop Spring based applications with less configuration. Good. First step, create Spring Starter application with below dependencies. One is Web Starter. Second one is Dev Tools. Second one, create REST controller, create REST controller with required methods. With required methods. Note every REST controller method, every REST controller method should be binded to HTTP protocol methods. Should be binded to HTTP protocol method. Third one, run the application and test it. So it's very simple to develop the REST APIs. There is no presentation logic. It is very simple to develop the REST APIs because there is no concept of presentation logic. Directly, we are going to write the REST controller. So create the REST controller with required methods. To create the REST controller to represent Java class as REST controller, we will use @REST controller annotation. To represent Java class as a REST controller, there is an annotation called @REST controller. Every REST controller method should be binded to HTTP protocol method. So here, example, we have get mapping. To bind a method to get request, we have get mapping. To bind a method to post request, we have post mapping. To bind a method to put request, we have put mapping. To bind a method to delete request, we have delete mapping. Right? We are going to create our first REST API by using Spring Boot. We are going to create our first REST API by using Spring Boot. Right. So here, one application I will create with a Spring Boot using this starter, web starter. Web starter having the support to develop web applications and RESTful services using this Spring framework. DevTools is used to restart the servers. Create the REST controller with required methods. How to represent one Java class as a REST controller? To represent one Java class as a REST controller, we are going to use @REST controller annotation. Every REST controller method should be binded to HTTP protocol, get to post to put to delete. So based on the requirement, we are going to bind our HTTP methods, right? Whatever the methods we write in the REST controller, we will bind those methods to HTTP protocol methods. It is mandatory. Every REST controller method should be binded to HTTP protocol method to provide the accessibility. Once this is done, there is no concept of view resolver and view files, guys. So it is going to provide the response directly. So we are going to run the application and test it. To test the REST APIs, we will use a Postman tool. To test REST APIs, we will use Postman tool. Which software we are going to use to test the REST APIs? We are going to use Postman tool to test our REST APIs. Clear? Guys, give me 2 minutes. So please read these points, how we are going to develop the REST API. I will be back in 2 minutes. All right, guys. So are you clear with the steps? Are you clear with the steps to develop our first REST API using Spring Boot? We need to create a Spring Starter application with below dependencies like a web starter, dev tools, create REST controller with required methods. To represent the Java class as REST controller, we will use @REST controller annotation. REST controller is nothing but a distributed component. That means we can access that from outside of the application also. Every REST controller method should be binded to HTTP protocol method like get mapping, post mapping, put mapping, and delete mapping. Then run the application and test it. To test the REST APIs, we will use Postman tool. So Postman tool we can install as a plugin in the Chrome browser, or we can download Postman software in our system. We can download Postman software in our system. Okay, let me create our first REST API using web starter. Good. So this is our workspace, file, new, Spring Starter project, Spring Starter project. This is 32 REST API, RESTful services, REST application 1. Click on next. You can keep it as a var or you can keep it as a jar also, no problem. So you can keep it as a jar because if you keep as a var, then web app folder will come. But here we don't need any presentation files. So REST app APIs can be packaged as a jar file. 31 REST app 1. I am keeping type as a maven. Packaging type I am keeping as a jar. Java version is 8. Language is Java. Group ID in.ashok IT. Artifact ID 31 REST app 1. Version I'm keeping as snapshot. Package I'm keeping as in.ashok IT. Click on next. Now here web starter I'm taking and DevTools starter I'm taking. Only two starters I'm taking. One is a web starter and the second one is DevTools. Web starter means it provides web starter means what it is providing. See here the description about the web starter. Building RESTful web services, serving web content with Spring Web MVC, building REST services with Spring, build web including RESTful applications using Spring MVC, uses Apache Tomcat as the default embedded container. Build web including build web including RESTful applications and Spring Web MVC. Build web including RESTful applications using Spring MVC. That is what we can do by using this web starter. That is what we are going to do by using this web starter. Are you guys clear? Are you guys clear? Good. Click on next, click on finish. My application got created. I think it is 32. 32. The project is getting created. I think a new version of the Spring Boot came 2.7.2. So it is downloading all the dependencies of that version. It is downloading all the dependencies of that version. Yes, project got created, guys. Project got created. Let's go to this 32 REST API. Yeah, let me close all the unrelated projects. Close all the unrelated projects. So this REST API got created. Check the pom.xml. Check the pom.xml. Spring Boot parent version, Java version 1.8, web starter we are using, dev tools we are using, test dependency came by default. So I have added web starter and dev tools. That's it. And by default, this start class will be created. This start class is the entry point for our boot application. Start class is the entry point for our boot application. Clear? Now let's go here and create one REST controller. I'm keeping that in REST package. I'm creating welcome REST controller. Welcome REST controller. So it is a normal Java class as of now. Now I want to make this class as a distributed component so that it can be accessed from outside. So this is a normal Java class now. I want to make this class as a distributed component. I want to access this as a distributed component. So to make this class as a distributed component, we are going to use @REST controller. @REST controller. @REST controller is the combination of controller plus response body. Controller plus response body is equal to @REST controller. See here, when you go for REST controller, a convenience annotation, a convenience annotation that is itself annotated with the controller and response body. Controller and response body. Inside this, we can write methods. Inside this, we can write the methods. Public response entity. What type of response you want to send to the clients? Get welcome message. What is the return type I'm taking? I'm taking response entity. Okay, so here I want to keep string response body response payload. Response payload is equal to, I'm going to keep the payload as welcome to Ashok IT. I'm going to keep the payload as welcome to Ashok IT. We already discussed about request structure and response structure. So here client is going to send a request to this method. I will map this method to one get request method. Client will send a get request to this method. Then this method should send some payload in the response. What is the response payload? I'm giving the response payload as welcome to Ashok IT. Now here, let us create the object for response entity. New response entity of body and status. So I'm going to send the body as response payload and status code http status.ok 200 I'm sending. That means it is successful. 200 I'm sending as a response. Return response entity of a payload and status code. This method I am binding to get request. How I am binding this method to get request? Using get mapping. Using get mapping. That's it. Our REST API is ready. Public class welcome REST controller. So this is binded to @REST controller. So the class, if you want to make your class as a right? So this class I'm representing as a REST controller. To represent this class as a REST controller, we are using one annotation called @REST controller annotation. Okay, guys. To represent this class as a REST controller, we are using @REST controller annotation. We are using @REST controller annotation. Are you guys clear? Are you guys clear with my point? Are you guys clear with my point? Right. Look at this. How I developed this REST controller. Right, guys. Welcome REST controller. So we are having at the rate REST controller annotation. In this REST controller, we are writing one method. That method we are binding to get request at the rate get mapping slash welcome. So here I am representing a payload, whatever the payload we want to send, whatever the payload that we want to send. That payload, I want to send the payload as a message, one text message I want to send in the payload. So to send this payload, I am using response entity. You can directly send a string also. Let me show you another approach of sending a response. Public string get greet message. Public string get greet message. String response payload is equal to good morning. Good morning. This is another approach to send response payload directly. This is also fine. Approach 1 is fine. Approach 2 is also fine. So get mapping, welcome, get mapping, greet, both are fine. Get mapping slash welcome, get mapping slash greet, both are fine. Here, in this second approach, we are directly returning string as a response. We are directly returning string as a response. When we return the string as a response, by default, it will construct a HTTP response object with status codes. If you want to specify status code in the response through program, if you want to decide which status code should be sent, then we are going to use response entity. Using the response entity, we are constructing the response object. This is my payload. This is the response payload it should send. And this is the HTTP status I want to send in the response. Here, if you want to construct a HTTP response on your own, then you will take the method return type as a response entity. I don't want to construct the HTTP response. Let's give the chance for the Spring only to create the response. Then you can directly return your payload. But this is the most recommended approach to develop REST API methods, taking response entity as a method return type. Taking response entity as a method return type. Are you guys clear with my point? Taking the response entity is the recommended approach to send the response to the clients. Now, I developed a REST controller. In this REST controller, I have taken two methods. One method is binded to get request slash welcome URL. Second method is also binded to get request slash greet URL In the first method, we are using response entity as a method return type. Response entity as a method return type. In the second method, we are using string as a method return type. When you return the string, Spring Framework will take care of creating the HTTP response object. Spring Framework will take the responsibility to create the response object. When we go for this, here we are creating the response object by using response entity. We are creating the object by using response entity. Are you guys clear with my point? Are you guys clear with my point? Are you guys clear with my point? Which one is the recommended approach? First approach or second approach? Which one is the recommended approach? Response entity. Why the response entity is the recommended approach? We are constructing the HTTP response object. We are constructing HTTP response object with the payload and status code. When you go for second approach, we are just giving the payload. They will construct the response object. Okay, this application is ready. Are you clear with the annotations I'm using? REST controller. What is the purpose of REST controller? It is used to represent our class as a distributed component. REST controller annotation is the combination of controller plus response body. There is no view resolver. Directly we are constructing the response object and we are sending to the client. Here also you can send a directly string as a response, then it will construct. This framework will take care of constructing the response object. So the framework will take the default status code as a 200 if the method is executed successfully. But this is not recommended. It is recommended approach. You construct the response entity with a payload and status code. Now let's start this application. By default, Spring Boot application will execute in embedded container Tomcat with 8080 port number. By default, Spring Boot applications will execute in Tomcat embedded container with port number 8080. Got my point? All of you? Yes, application started in embedded container with port number 8080. Context path is nothing. Guys, currently in my REST controller, methods are binded to GET request. GET request methods you can access from browser, but post request methods you cannot access from browser. For that, we are going to take Postman. Okay, so let's go to Google Chrome. You can add the Postman. You can add the Postman as a plugin. You can add the Postman as a plugin. Okay, add Postman plugin to Chrome. Postman plugin for Chrome. You can download the Postman software also, or you can add it as a plugin also. I have already added that as a plugin for my Chrome. Let me launch this Postman app. I'm launching this Postman application. Instead of using the Postman Chrome is now the Postman app. Here you can download the Postman software also. Windows 64-bit, you can download the Postman, or you can use it from here also. You can use it from here also, right? Now my Postman is opened. My Postman is opened. Okay. My Postman is opened. So this is the screen of the Postman. Postman is used to test REST API. So we developed our REST API. Our REST API is running in the embedded Tomcat container. Now let's go to this Postman. Let's make a request to the REST API using Postman to test behavior of the REST API. What type of request you want to send using Postman? You have a option to select request type. Do you want to go with get or post or put or patch or delete or copy like this? There are several methods available to send request. Okay, get to post to put, get to post to put to patch delete like that. There are several methods available. Get post put to patch delete like that. There are several methods available. And what is the URL of your REST API? Okay, I want to make a get request. My REST API running in the local host in the same machine on the port number 8080/welcome/welcome. So here, if the REST API is secured, then we will go for authorization. Do you want to send any headers in the request? Key value? No. Body not available because it is a get request. For the get request, there is no body, right? Let's make a request, send. Did we get the response? This is the response body. These are the response headers, and this is the status code. What is the status code we got? 200. So what is the meaning of status code 200? 200 means it is a success, okay message. So whatever the request we sent to the REST API, that request processed successfully and we got the response. Response contains status code, headers and body, HTTP response, right? Similarly, if you make a request to another URL pattern, which is called greet URL pattern, click on send. We got good morning. So here also we got 200 status code, response body, response headers, connection, content length, content type, date, keep alive. Like this, we are getting HTTP response. Okay, in the both methods, the response structure is the same, right? When I go for greet also, I'm getting 200 as a status code. When I go for welcome also, I'm getting 200 as a status code. But here for the welcome method, I am setting the status code as OK. OK means 200. OK means 200. Status code 200. Here response entity is used to prepare HTTP response object. Okay, so this extension of HTTP entity and that adds an HTTP status code used in REST template as well as in the controller methods. So this response entity is a predefined class which is used to construct a HTTP response object. What kind of response? What kind of response we want to send to our client, that we can decide by using response entity. So this response entity constructor is taking two parameters. One is response body and the second one is a status code. I'm setting the body as my payload message and I'm setting the status code as OK. That means 200. If I directly return the string as a response, then this Spring WebMVC module is taking care of constructing the response object and sending the response to the client. So in two ways we can develop, but which one is the most recommended approach? Which one is the most recommended approach? Approach 1 or approach 2? Guys, approach 1 is recommended or approach 2 is recommended? Come on. Approach 1 is recommended. Approach 1 is recommended. Okay. Note, download Postman tool to test our REST APIs functionality. Download Postman tool to test our REST API functionality. Okay, guys. So this is our first REST controller. This is our first REST controller. Are you guys clear with my point? This is our first REST controller. First REST controller. This is binded to GET request. This is also binded to get request, but URL patterns are different. Okay. Can you guys develop our first REST controller and can you test it? You understand how I have created my first REST API? I created a boot application with below dependencies. I created REST controller with required methods. To represent our class as a REST controller, I am using @REST controller annotation. This annotation is equal to two annotations. One is a controller plus response body. Then I'm writing methods. You can write multiple methods in the REST controller. Those methods should be binded to HTTP protocol methods. To bind our methods to HTTP protocol methods, I'm using get mapping. I want to bind this method to get request. That means client will send a get request to get the welcome message as well as to get the greet message. So when client send a get request with /welcome, this method will execute. It is constructing a HTTP response object using response entity with the status code and payload. Payload means response body that we are sending. Status code means to represent what happened with the request. And we have another method. In the another method, I'm directly returning a string value. Still, we are getting the response. Greet request I'm sending. I'm getting a response body payload as a good morning. Headers we have and status code with the status message 200 with OK message also we are having. Are you clear? Are you clear with my point? Yeah. So which tool we are using to test this REST API? Which software we are using to test this REST API? We are using Postman. Okay, it is free. It is free software. Postman is free, right? You download the Postman tool and you test your REST API by using Postman tool. Okay, guys, when I'm sending a request to this REST API as a GET request, can I send some data in the body? Can I send some data in the body? Guys, come on. Can I send some data in the body? No. Why? Why I can't send the data in the body? It's a GET request. There is no data in the body. Now, I want to send a request to the REST. I want to send some data to the REST API in the GET request. How can I send the data in the GET request? Within the GET request. In the GET request, I want to send the data to the API. How can I send the data to the API within the GET request? Using URL. Using URL, right? Query parameters or path parameters I need to use to send the data in the request. Either you can use a query parameter or you can use path parameters. All right. Now here to send the data, GET request will not contain the body. To GET request will not contain body to send data. We can use query params and path parameters. We can use query params and path params. We can use query params and path params to send data in GET request. Query params and path parameters will represent data in the URL. Query params and path params will represent data in URL directly. Okay, right. Query parameters, path parameters will represent data in the URL directly. So what is query param? What is query params? Query parameters are used to send the data to the server in the URL. Query params are used to send data to server in URL. Query parameters will represent data in key value format. Query parameters will represent data in key value format. Query parameters will start with query params will start with query parameters will start with question mark. Will start with question mark. Query parameters will be separated by and symbol. Will be separated by and symbol. Query parameters should present only at the end of the URL. Query parameter should present only at the end of the URL. So for example, www.ashokit.in course is equal to SBMS and trainer is equal to Ashok. So see here, we are representing data in the URL ashokit.in or ashokit.in slash courses at the rate name is equal to SBMS, trainer is equal to Ashok. Here it is the start point of my query parameter. This is one query parameter key value and this is another query parameter key value. Query parameters are used to send data to server in the URL. Query params will represent data in key value format. Key will be available and value will be available. Query params will start with ? Query parameters will be separated by and symbol. Query parameters should present only at the end of the URL. So here your URL is available up to here. At the end of the URL, you need to write the query parameter. You cannot keep that in the middle. Okay, guys. Now, to read the query parameters from the URL, we will use request param annotation. What is the annotation we are going to use to read the query parameters? There is an annotation called request param annotation to read the query parameters. Got it? So if client is sending data in the URL, then how REST API can read that data from the query parameters? REST API can read the data from the query parameter by using request param annotation. Okay, now let me take another method or the same method. Let me take this welcome. Here I'm going to take a name, string name. So this string name, I'm going to take it from query parameter. So I'm taking @request param. What is the key name? Key is the name. Now I will specify name. Welcome to Ashok IT. So whatever the name you send in the URL, that name I will read from the query parameter by using request param. Okay, here /welcome name is equal to Raju. Click on send. See, Raju, welcome to Ashok IT. Are we able to send the data to the server in the URL? Are we able to send the data to the server in the URL? How I am sending? I'm sending in the form of key value. It is called as a query parameter. Query parameters are used to send the data to the server in the URL. Query parameters are used to send data to server in the URL. Query params will be representing data in key value format. Query params will start with ? Query parameters will be separated by and symbol. Query parameters should represent only at the end of the URL. Can I send multiple query parameters also? Can we send multiple query parameters also in the URL? Come on, guys. Can we send multiple query parameters also in the URL? Yes, we can send multiple query parameters also in the URL by using and separation. How to read the query parameters in the REST controller method? How can we read the query parameters in the REST controller method? What is the annotation we have to read the query parameters in the REST controller method? We are having request param annotation. Are you clear with this? What is query parameter and how to deal with query parameters? Are you clear with this? What is query parameter and how to deal with query parameters? Here I'm taking name as a query parameter. So here the URL To test this, http :/localhost 8080 / welcome name is equal to Raju. So using this, we can test our REST API. Using this, we can test our REST API. So we are sending a GET request. My method is binded to GET request. I developed my first REST API. That first REST API I developed by using @REST controller with GET mapping. What is the purpose of @REST controller? It is used to represent our class as a REST controller. That means it is a distributed component. It is used for B2B communication. In this REST controller, I am writing a method. That method I binded to GET mapping. That means client can access this method by sending a GET request. Same thing, another method also I have, which is also binded to GET request. Both methods are binded to GET request. URL pattern is different. First method URL pattern is /welcome. Second method URL pattern is /greet. Right. GET request will not contain body to send the data. Will not contain request body. Will not contain request body. We already discussed about HTTP protocol methods. GET request will not contain the request body to send the data. We can use query params and path params to send the data in the GET request. Query params and path params will represent data in the URL directly. First, we are talking about query parameters. Later, we will see what is path parameter. Query params are used to send the data to server in URL directly. There is no request body because it is a GET request. That's why I can send the data to the server directly in the URL. Okay, guys. Query params will represent data in key value format. Query parameters will start with the question mark. Query parameters will be separated by and symbol. Query parameters should represent only at the end of the URL. Like this, I'm going to specify. So here, ashokit.in/courses question mark. Here I'm starting my query parameter. Name is equal to SBMS, one query parameter, and trainer is equal to Ashok. There are two query parameters available. How to read these query parameters in the REST controller? There is an annotation called request param. Using this request param annotation, we can read the query parameters. Currently, in the URL, I'm sending one query parameter. So I am writing one method parameter with a request param. If you have two query parameters, then you will write one more variable with request param. If you have another query parameter, for example, let me create one more REST controller, new class, course REST controller. I'm creating one more REST controller with a name called course REST controller. I'm representing this class as a REST controller by using @REST controller annotation. Okay, so here I'm going to write a public. I'm going to write one method, public string get course fee, string course name, string trainer name, string course name, and string trainer name. Okay, right. I'm going to prepare string response body is equal to course name by trainer name fee is 7,000. Okay, right. Let me return this response body. I'm going to make this as get mapping. I will bind it to /course. How many variables I have? Two variables I have for the method. One is a course name variable. Another one is a trainer name variable. So this is one request variable, request param. I'm going to specify this as a course name. And this is another request parameter, which is a trainer name, name, course name, and trainer name. So this is one query parameter, and this is another query parameter. So like this, can we take multiple query parameters also? Can a URL have a multiple query parameters? Can we send more than one query parameter? Yes, we can take more than one query parameter. Is this the recommended approach to write the method return type? Is this recommended approach to write the method return type? No. What is the recommended approach? Response entity. So how to write it? I'm going to use response entity of string. Response entity of string. Now here I'm going to do return new response entity of response body comma http status dot OK. Body comma http status dot OK. So I have a method which is binded to a get request. URL pattern is a slash course. This method is having two query parameters. One is a C name, another one is a T name. That is a course name and a trainer name. Good. Let's run this. I have two REST controllers now. Run as boot application. Application started. First one is welcome. I'm able to get Raju. I'm sending one query parameter in the URL. Raju, welcome to Ashok IT. If you go to greet, there is no query parameter. Send it. I'm able to get good morning. Now let's go to course question mark. C name is equal to JRTP and T name is equal to Ashok. See here, I'm sending C name and T name. Send it. JRTP by Ashok fees is 7,000 rupees. Are we able to send two query parameters? And are we able to read both query parameters in the REST controller method? Are we able to send two query parameters? And are we able to read both query parameters in the REST controller method? Got it. Got it. Fine. So like this, we can take a query parameter to send the data. We can take more than one query parameter also, and we can send the data in the URL to the REST API, which is having more than one query parameter, dealing with two query parameters in the method, dealing with working with two query params in URL. So what is the URL to test it? This is the URL to test it. Localhost colon 8080. Localhost means currently it is running in my local system. HTTP colon / localhost colon 8080 / course. Course name is equal to JRTP and the trainer name is equal to Ashok. Are you guys clear? What is query parameter? How to develop a first REST API? How to develop our first REST API? What is query parameter? When we will go for this query parameter, how to read the query parameters, how to take two query parameters in the single method, what is the response entity? Are you guys clear with this? Are you guys clear with this? Yep. I want you to practice this before coming to tomorrow's session. And guys, today we are starting our Java real-time project batch. This Java real-time project batch is starting from today. It is at 8:30 p.m. IST. Zoom link you can find in the website for the Java real-time project. Here register for demo. So at 8:30 p.m. you can click on this button. When you click on this button, it will open a Zoom page. You can fill up your details and you can join for that class. Today at 8:30 p.m. a demo session for Java real-time project. So please invite your friends also to join this Java real-time project, because that course is very, very, very important for the people to get the job as a Java full stack developer. So that Java real-time project we are going to cover with 20+ real-time tools and AWS cloud and Angular we are going to provide. Okay, so Java real-time project is going to start from today at 8:30 p.m. IST. Zoom link is available in the website directly. You can go to training schedules, online training, and you can click on this button and you can register. Don't miss the demo session. That is very, very, very important for today. So today I'm going to explain what are the prerequisites to attend this course, what is our course content, what is the benefit of joining Java real-time project, all those details. We'll see you today evening at 8:30 p.m. Thank you guys. Have a great day. Please practice this REST API before coming to tomorrow's session. Kapil, we will provide that, man. Angular also will be covered as part of this course, guys. You no need to pay separately for the Angular. That is the discount that I'm going to give you. Okay, fine. Thank you guys. I will upload this class notes, so please practice it.